One of the things that I want you guys to consider as we go through today, just because I think it's important for all of the things that we cover in these research reviews. Every single study that I bring up is one study, and sometimes I'll kind of bring in a couple other thoughts or compare a couple things, but you remember to keep it in the context of the source, the timing, what they cover. A lot of times, if you go back to these original studies, the researchers themselves will say, here are the limitations of our study. Here's what we didn't do. Here's what now we think would be a good place to head into some further research. So, never take the things that I say or that you perceive from a research review like this as, oh my gosh, now I have the answer. Hopefully it's just one good piece of the puzzle. But I wanted to intro this in that way because they did some really, really good things with this study, but it's still kind of limited in what they could study. So this was in the International Journal of Obesity. And to be in a journal of this magnitude, you gotta have some chops. I mean, this is not just grad students trying to get a grade. This is something where they're really looking at some serious inquisition. It was also reported in the Journal of Nature, and it was in 2015, so it's rather current. And one of the things I like about current studies is just simply that they have had more time to review the latest research. It's kind of fun. Last week, I think I mentioned as I went through a list of studies of citations, there was one they had pulled up from 1967. And it's amazing when a study like that stands the test of time, because that means they really did something groundbreaking that people are still citing it. It was pivotal. It's obviously been affirmed in several different ways. But there's also an advantage of something that's really new and current. And sometimes, even as you may see here, they have the latest, greatest technology for research, some things that may not have been available before. But what they were looking at was the timing of calories. And what they wanted to specifically see is when you have a large meal, and they were really looking at the age-old question: should you have a big breakfast or not a big breakfast? Is it bad to eat calories at night, or is it not bad to eat calories at night? So they studied the difference between eating a meal at 8 in the morning or the exact same meal at 10 o'clock at night. And they wanted to look at resting metabolic rate. They wanted to look at some of the biochemical markers, like what's happening with fatty acids in the bloodstream, glucose, and so forth. Even the thermic effect of food, the dietary thermic effect of food. So let me first of all see if there's anything here. Just as an introduction, if you guys haven't been reading this already, I'll just kind of skim through this. Early insulin secretion after a meal is significantly higher in the AM. These are some of their notes of just like before we even do the study. Here are just some physiological facts that we know. Insulin sensitivity decreases later in the day, largely due to our circadian rhythms. Decreased concentration of hormones and peptides that regulate hunger and satiety later in the day. So again, just through biological evolution, it seems like our species, having kind of woken up in the morning and you're getting ready for the day. You probably, nobody necessarily eats at night if you're not a nocturnal animal. So your body's ready for food. You're in that fasted state. And so that seems to be how we are primed. So let's get into some of the things that they looked at. I'm going to read this, kind of carefully, just so you guys have it. So, some of the things I will just copy and paste because I think their narrative is important. However, data in the literature often show contrasting results with differences in exercise level, hours of sleeping, antecedent diets, meaning what they're eating, prior to the test, variation in the duration of the fasting state. So that's going to be key in just a minute as I explain it to you. Presence of comorbidity and low numbers of subjects enrolled acting as confounding factors. Indeed, the ideal setting to study diurnal variation in energy expenditure is to measure post-absorptive resting metabolic rate under the same conditions every time. So that was what they really wanted to do in the study. Create the same thing, the same context, And so what they did, if you were eating at 8 in the morning or you were eating at 10 at night, they made all of those subjects fast for 8 hours before each one because they wanted that internal state to be the same. That's a pro and a con, because how many people eating at 10 o'clock at night would have fasted for 8 hours before that meal? So there are some nuances to pick apart. The aim of our study, therefore, was to compare the calorimetric and metabolic response to identical meals. It's interesting they say a low carbohydrate meal, because it really wasn't, as I'll show you. It may be just kind of their standards. But they picked out 20 subjects, 10 male, 10 female, all fairly young, pretty healthy, BMI in the healthy range. And as I said, they compared these meals at 8 a.m. and 10 p.m., 8 hours fasting prior. They standardized the diet, physical activity, rest, meal timing, did everything they could to make sure it was a really good study. A randomized crossover trial means that both of the groups got to do it both ways, and they got to see the differences, with each person. Now, here's where they really did some things well. I need to move my video screen here out of the way. They did 30, 60, and 120-minute post-meal calorimetry, and that means they put them in a little chamber, or a gas mask, and they can measure their oxygen and carbon dioxide levels, even thermic changes in their breath. So they're looking at resting metabolic rate changes. They did blood draws every 30 minutes for 3 hours. And they even did a 24-hour pre and post urine collection, because they were looking at nitrogen levels and so forth, and just anything that would have been different in the digestion and absorption of nutrients. The meal, here's why it's interesting that they called this a low carbohydrate meal. And I think you guys may have a chuckle, as I did. So first of all, it's almost a 1,200 calorie meal, which for a lot of us in our world, in nutrition, dieting, performative sport, physique sport, that's a monster of a meal for a lot of people. For those in the general population, if you're going to a restaurant, or you're even just picking up a sandwich and baked chips at Subway, it's probably about 1,200 calories. I mean, that's a pretty standard meal for, if you were to go get a 6-inch sub, loaded in a bag of chips. But it was still almost 40% carbs. And for some reason, they called that a low carb meal. But I think because through just dietetic standards, it's usually around 60% of calories from carbs. But here's what they had in that. I think I wrote this down. Maybe I didn't. Oh yeah, I did right there. The white bread, the ham, cheese, juice, and 25-gram supplement. And then, as I said, one of the ways they wanted to standardize this is they made sure that they all had the exact same meal 8 hours before they did this meal for the test, except they just left out the protein supplement, and then they had them fast. So again, what they were checking was the basal metabolic rate and resting metabolic rate right before they did the meal, and then they would test it, as you saw, every 30 minutes for the next 3 hours. They were looking at diet-induced thermogenesis, as I mentioned, glucose, fat oxidation, nitrogen, and all the respiratory gases. So now here are the results. You guys may kind of expect this, those of you who view a lot of research, but when you look at, so the morning and the evening, if you look at the number, the N number up here, because it was a cross randomized trial, they, each of the 20 subjects did both. So they all got to be involved in the morning and the evening. So the average fasting metabolic rate, which is probably a nice little side note here, both men and women, all between 20 and 35 years old, all relatively active and healthy, look at their combined resting metabolic rate, 1,500 calories. Oh my gosh, Joe, I'm supposed to be eating 3,000 calories a day. Health Magazine says if I don't eat 3,000 a day, I'm going to die. I'm going to lose all my muscle. My metabolism will crash. Well, here's the actual average human metabolism when tested. So I'll leave that to the side. As I said, just a little note. But then here's where that diet-induced thermogenesis comes in. So once they have this big meal, and you guys know when you have a big meal, like you get hot, you get sweaty, you're eating a big burger, some ribs at the restaurant, and you just feel that body temperature go up. That's diet-induced thermogenesis. Well, when you consume that meal in the morning, that's a pretty substantial difference when it goes up from about 1,600 calories to 1,900 calories. And then it only goes up from about 1,500 calories to 1,750 in the evening. So pretty big difference. And I think, again, I have to move you guys around our little thumbnails here. Is there a P? Yeah, the P value over there. So look at that P value, 0.98. That's a pretty high P value, meaning that the correlation is very, very high. So they're very confident, in other words, in their results. Then look at the actual, again, dietary induced thermogenesis. You would just have to do the math, 327 calories versus 237. The fasting metabolic rate, or resting metabolic rate as just a percent, you see is, about the same, except again, your metabolism is just a little bit higher in the morning, which may be of note. It's almost so inconsequential there. But at the same time, we tend to think, man, I've had food during the day, or I'm up during the day, I'm awake, my metabolism would be higher. It's actually a little stronger in the morning. And then it does, as you see again, bump up a little bit higher in the morning than in the evening. So the rate of diet-induced thermogenesis is higher. Let's skip down here. Carbohydrate oxidation, this will come in handy as I show you the next couple of slides, is double, more, almost triple. So your ability to oxidize and use carbohydrates is higher in the morning. Now, I should save some of my thoughts to the end on how to compare these things, but just keep that in mind. So some of these nuances and differences here, because I do want to come back to the fact that they made these people fast, and they're looking at the food intake at 10 o'clock at night. It's not like dinner. It wasn't at, I don't know when you guys eat, but 6, 7, 8 o'clock. It was 10 o'clock at night. Fat oxidation was just a little bit, actually substantially higher in the evening. So it seems like we oxidize fat a little bit more in the evening, if you want to take this study as representative of that. But let's get into some of these other graphs here. And sorry when I blow these things up so they're viewable, they're a little bit pixelated here. But just glucose levels post-meal. So you see before any food whatsoever in that fasting state, that's the basal. Then they test them just when they start eating. Another thing I think I had written down, but I did not point it out to you guys, is that they made them all kind of pace themselves for the meal. So everybody got done eating within 25 to 30 minutes. And so it's not like somebody like me could eat it all in 12 seconds and somebody else is still eating it slowly and chewing it 30 minutes later. They wanted to make sure that everybody, ate about the same way, again, for just digestion standardization. So by the time you get to about, 60 minutes, that's where you start seeing stuff hit your bloodstream. So for the first 30 to 45 minutes, obviously mechanically in your stomach, you're mechanistically digesting this food, but a lot of it's not hitting your bloodstream until it gets into your small intestine. And then there's not really a gigantic shoot. Again, 1,200 calories, 40% of it come from carbs. I might have expected blood sugar to go up a little bit more, but I think it's because it's a fasted state. In both cases, morning or evening, they hadn't eaten for 8 hours. So blood sugar never even got above 100 for those in the evening, but it was higher. Remember how I talked to you guys about in the morning sometimes when you eat, especially if you're active at all, if you're doing some cardio or something, how you can just get hungrier a lot sooner. Your body's kind of flying through that food. Man, these people who, ate in the morning, it did not even budge. Their blood sugar did not go above 90. So two things I want you to note here. Obviously, the evening, we're not utilizing carbs quite as well. but it's not that much of a difference. It's not off the charts. You did not see this huge insulin spike. And so I think that's going to be a good application point. Then, just as you would assume, glucose would correlate exactly to insulin. So at the same time, around the 60, between 30 and 60 minutes, you start seeing insulin surge up to start taking care, to start disposing of this glucose. And then insulin is always going to correlate to glucose levels and just food in general, the overall calorie load. So, that's just to bring those blood sugar levels down, utilize those macronutrients. And then fatty acids. I'm glad they looked at triglycerides and free fatty acids. Same thing. They just, through the digestive time, your body almost, because of insulin. So I don't know if this will interest you or not, but the lipids in their bloodstream started out at a certain level. And then even after eating a 1,200 calorie meal, they actually went down. And that's just the mechanism of insulin. It's just to store this energy. Now, one of the things that you also have to know about this study is to do the calorimetry type testing, you have to be stationary. And so they're in the lab, they eat this meal, and then they're having blood draws and so forth for 3 hours. So they're not on a track, they're not running around, they're not chasing their kids, they're not in their office under stress, walking around. They're just in the lab undergoing these tests, a lot of them being, literally on their backs. And yet, just because of the mechanism of insulin, the triglycerides are coming down, meaning they're going somewhere and they're being stored. They're being stored as body fat, at least resynthesized as body fat. Same thing with triglycerides, but a little bit more stable. Triglycerides are a little bit of a denser form of free fatty acids. If you could consider, lipids kind of like carbs, where you have simple and complex, triglycerides, have different bonds, and they have glycerol, as part of their molecular structure. And so they're just a little bit denser. They're not really going in that many places, where your body uses free fatty acids more as energy, specifically to turn into glucose through your liver as you need them as a secondary energy source. So not a lot to really look at there, except again that in evening, the metabolism, we already know resting metabolism just doesn't go up quite as high. Dietary induced thermogenesis doesn't go up quite as high with that evening meal because of presumably circadian evolutionary rhythm. But there's just that little bump, and then it stabilizes kind of quickly. So it seems like most of the dance here is around our ability to use carbohydrates. So what I want you guys to tell me as nice junior scientists, what does this mean? Because there wasn't necessarily, let me come back up here to the real values of the study. And I want to determine, is there anything we can take from this study? Was it significant at all? And I will say that the researchers thought there was. Number one is they compared their study to other studies that had been done. They did roll through a lot of comparative citations. They said, we really do like ours because we set it up to really compare what we wanted to compare. And that is, in the exact same fasted scenario, randomized cross, populated study, we really got some incredible data. But they did admit it's not necessarily how everybody would choose to eat. And so they would admit this is one biochemical part of the puzzle, but not necessarily, giving us something to really move on. But here's what I would say first, as just anthropologically making some of the same conclusions they did, and then anecdotally going to my own conclusion. I have mentioned to you guys in our daily chats that I'm pretty sure it's not just in my head, but throughout a 20-year competitive bodybuilding career, about half of the times I was getting ready for a contest, I would train and do my hardest, most intense activity in the morning. And about half of my competitive career, I would do it in the late afternoon or evening. And for some reason, when I trained in the morning and did my hardest work in the morning, meaning I was also supporting that training with the highest amount of pre and post workout food, that's my biggest priority when dieting. I always got leaner and retained more muscle in the morning. Even though I don't feel my best training in the morning, I don't prefer to train in the morning. For some reason, I lost more body fat and I retained more muscle. I think this could explain that. I think the fact that uh, from that evolutionary biology perspective, we simply are primed to have our most energetic time of the day in the morning. So sun breaks, pineal gland is stimulated. Pineal gland is part of the whole, brainstem amygdala structure. That's what controls some of those hormones and peptides that control hunger and satiety, and gives us those prompts to go feed, to hunt and gather. And so, even though today a lot of people, me included, would say total calories matter most. Total calories in a week matter most. Total calories in a day matters most. Do what you need to do. If you want to get involved in intermittent fasting and not eat until lunch, if that works for you, that's fine. If you want to, squeeze things in an 8-hour window, that's fine. As we like to say, the best diet is the one you can stick to. But if you're really looking at the biochemistry, it seems like having your greatest amount of food in the morning. So we have to go back to saying, I guess grandma was right after all. Eat a big breakfast, Junior. Gotta fill up your belly so you can be smart and think in school. That's actually right. And because you're going to be your most metabolically efficient in the morning, maybe that is a great time to train, even if it is just cardio, because you could prime this pump even more. Something they did not look at, which would be interesting, is let's say the study was set up the exact same way. What if they did a really good cardio at 7 in the morning and then had this meal versus 9 at night and then had this meal? What if they had a training session? What if they looked at this, but they compared it as most of us would actually eat? Like say, okay, we all, maybe I shouldn't say we all, but the average person would eat breakfast in the morning. Not everybody eats a 1,200 calorie meal at 10 o'clock at night. And not everybody would fast for 8 hours before they eat a 1,200 calorie meal at 10 o'clock at night. So what if they really did this kind of study in a way that's checking it at 6 or 7 in the evening? And what if it wasn't with 8 hours of fasting? I think that would be interesting, but I think it would actually accelerate the results. I think it would actually show more differentiation, because then at that point, I think you would see it even further dampening of that metabolic need in the evening. So let me come back to my final questions here that I will restate, and then I'll take everything off of the share so we can chat face to face. So as I said, even though there were what I would consider substantial differences in showing the diet-induced thermogenesis and the resting metabolic rate change, which would affirm their hypothesis, which is we should have our biggest meals in the morning, and maybe we don't need that much food at night. And so, kind of doing the old school method may be exactly what we're supposed to do. There still wasn't a substantial change. If you remember those glucose level changes and so forth, it shows that we're pretty resilient. If your calories are being controlled for the day, because these people, remember, minus the protein supplement of 100 calories, 25 grams worth of protein, they literally had 2 meals in these days, the 1,200 calorie meal, then the 1,100 calorie meal without. So it was a pretty standard amount of food for somebody not dieting. And yet you didn't see that much change in the glucose levels. You didn't see that much change in the lipid levels. And so I would say, even though you get a little bit more bang for your buck in the morning, it's just not that starkly different. But maybe over time it would be. You add up those differences daily over 6 months, and maybe it truly is. So I'm going to stop the share here, guys, and bring you back. And get some discussion going. Tell me what you guys think.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So in this study, did they mention or say what exactly it was that they were eating? Because I would think that the quality of the meal would have an effect on that as well.
Yeah, that was in the slide. I'll go through it again here. I've got it. So it was 100 grams in weight of white bread, 100 grams of ham, 50 grams of cheese, 200 milliliters of fruit juice, and 25 grams of a protein supplement. So it was 1,168 calories, 30% protein, 31% fat, 39% carbs. So it just kind of looks like a big old ham sandwich and juice, and a protein supplement along with that.
Okay, and then I do have a question about the glucose. When they check their glucose in the morning, what would you say is like a standard across the board level having fasted overnight for a glucose level?
The normative standard that we all want to see is anything under 100 or under 99, but it's typically between 70 and 90 is what you want to see for people. And it seems like everybody was right in that range. And then that was one of the things that was, a little bit startling to me, was that nobody went even above 100 or I shouldn't say nobody, but at least the cumulative data. But yeah, that's another great question, Amanda. So kind of high glycemic, fruit juice, white bread. They're getting 30% of the calories from fat, and that's coming from the meat and the cheese. It would be interesting to show something a little bit healthier, but I think you would just see what you would expect to see. Something healthier. It would just kind of mute those numbers, but maybe there would still be a gap. The same. Maybe not. But what if they had 2,000 calories? Would that widen it, and you're even more metabolically, or you're still the same level of efficient in the morning? Like there could be a line there between how much people can eat. That would, of course, be dependent on their health status, everybody individually. I'm sure when you're looking at those average aggregate numbers, some people were probably kind of outliers high. Some people may have been really low. But anything else stand out? Stacy, were you going to say something?
Well, so I had to switch over to my laptop because I couldn't get on my phone. So I missed a little bit of that one chart that you have. But I was wondering, like the slight difference in the fat oxidation rates. Let's say that you're trying to manage your cholesterol through diet before you get onto a statin or something like that. Would this help? Like this kind of, is it just enough that it could help them, make sure that they have a fuller meal during the day and kind of taper down at night? Like, can you walk me through that?
Yeah, that's a really, really good point in the fact that this was a 2-meal-a-day test, and they were done 7 days apart, so they could kind of wash them out to be cross-randomized. And if you did eat that way, you would certainly have better glucose and lipid disposal. That's part of the biggest values in our Friday research review. We've got a couple sessions that we did on the effects of fasting and the different forms of fasting, from 1 meal a day fasting to alternate day fasting and all that. And that's something that happens very, very rapidly. As soon as you stop just snacking all day long and constantly putting stuff in your bloodstream, you really reduce cholesterol and lipids. I think I shared this with you, Stacy, but or at least in one of these sessions. One of my biggest turnarounds I've ever seen. I'll give you 2 examples. A guy came to me and his triglyceride level was 900. Okay, that's like your heart trying to pump pudding through your blood vessels. And in 30 days of just coming down to what any of us would probably have suggested as a macronutrient range, and he's working out every day, and obviously not like a marathon runner, but he's just getting started. So he goes from nothing to a 30-day introductory period. His triglycerides went from 900 to 90 in 30 days.
Yeah.
And,
Wow.
and then another client of mine was a physician who was a vegetarian marathon runner on statins, 45 years old, and even doing all of that to try and control his cholesterol. His cholesterol was over 400 because he had the disease of hypercholesterolemia. And just by, because he was vegetarian too, low protein, marathon runner or distance runner, he would do that to try and, just beat this disease. And I got him reducing his mileage on the road just to add some weight training so we could at least involve more muscle tissue than just his legs, and increased his protein a little bit, brought his carbs down, and we got his cholesterol down to around 200.
That's
So,
good.
yeah, I mean, a huge change for somebody already on cholesterol lowering meds and already 145 pounds at a low body fat level.
Well, I have a client, she's 4'11", 101 pounds, and she was just diagnosed with high cholesterol and trying to manage it first with diet. And I had her do the hip to waist ratio to see if that confirmed, and it absolutely did. Like she's carrying, mostly the fat is in her midsection. So we are making adjustments with her diet significantly, but you would never look at this 4'11", 101 pound person and think that they could possibly fall in very active into that range. But she falls into that that puddle of people that I seem to collect as clients that eat a lot of healthy fat.
Mm.
And just have gone too far with the
Yeah.
avocados and the almonds and the olive oil. And now here's where we are.
Yeah, I mean, good fat is still fat. And if you really are married to the notion that you just need that much, you just have to be virtually keto, because you can't give, as soon as you give your body any carbohydrates, you're going to use that first. And then even that good fat is just going to be stored as fat. And so, you're kind of painting yourself into a corner. But this study, I have another little anecdotal story to at least tell you why it's confirmational in my mind. I had mentioned to some of you guys who are on our daily chats Monday through Friday that 2 months ago, I switched back to training in the mornings. As much as I hate doing that, I'm doing it, and I'm finding some value in just the whole discipline of it and getting up early, and I like it, but I hate it. And here is one of the things that I noted right away is, I mean, the first week when I was squatting and deadlifting in the morning, I just felt like 40 to 50% of my strength was gone. And it did not feel like it was going to come back. I just thought, man, is this really the cost of training in the morning? And then I was talking to a client of mine, and it's really funny because now he's like teaching me, he's like, well, what are you eating? And I'm like, well, I'm rushing in here in the morning. And so I don't want to like a lot of food. And so I'm, eating a granola bar or something, maybe 140, 150 calories, 25 grams of carbs. He said, well, dummy, what, you should eat more. And I said, I don't think it's food. Like, I feel it's like orthopedic. I just feel like my body's not warmed up and that kind of thing. So as a test all week long, I've gone from 25 grams of carbs pre-workout in the morning to 75. I've tripled it. My strength just went back up to the moon. And what I'm finding is now I'm just naturally eating less even later in the day. I'm not even that hungry at night, 12, 16 hours later. My breakfast or post-workout meal doesn't have to be quite as high, which I did tap that down a little bit to make up for the carbs I'm having before. So without even realizing it, I just inadvertently kind of did what this study showed. I'm having more of my food in the morning when I'm most metabolically active. And then I'm really superimposing metabolic activity by training, and your body's just more efficient at oxidizing those carbs anyway. So why not fuel your morning workout to have that great, training, and then, taper off later in the day when, due to circadian rhythms and, hypothalamus activity and so forth, your body's tapering down for sleep. And so, I mean, there you go. I just kind of answered my own question with self-experimentation. And I'm back to supporting Kellogg's, back to having Pop-Tarts, which I didn't want to do. Part of my thing, this dietary cycle was to have, no processed food, no sugar, that kind of thing. But at 5 a.m, I can't exactly eat like a big bowl of oatmeal and then go train. So I'm eating something quick, and it's working. Any other thoughts or questions on the study itself, or anything we can try to apply? Tiffany? Nope, you're not.
Dan's talking, but he didn't unmute.
Oh, okay. I got it. Yeah, I'm not sure I got this. Does this mean that your body absorbs the nutrients in the food more effectively in the AM than the PM?
It's not that it absorbs them better, Dan. It uses them better.
Okay, so if that's the case, then if you work out in the morning and then eat a good meal right afterwards, you should get more protein synthesis, or is that wishful thinking?
Well, one of the things they did not look at here was like it wasn't a protein study. They weren't looking at lean body mass or anything like that. They were just looking at metabolic activity.
Mm-hmm.
And so and it was purely for weight loss. This is in the Journal of Obesity. So they really don't give two shits about whether people are gaining or losing muscle. But they did, through the urinalysis testing, check nitrogen just to make sure there wasn't massive fluctuations. And I just don't think there was. There was nothing that popped out at me, or nothing that they noted. But again, they weren't even training. They didn't. That wasn't a variable either. So the biggest thing is, if you go back to my just little anecdotal study of, I can come in here and I can train. I can save most of my food for evening, and yet train in the morning. But if I really support that training, because that by priming the pump of your metabolism with food before you train, you just get a better training session. I can do the same thing in the afternoon. I do my cardio in the afternoon, and I use the same apparati each time. I kind of have my little metrics that I do, and I'm doing the same amount of time and same levels of intensity on a bike and an arc trainer and a treadmill. And the way I try to progress is to, beat my time or my distance. So all the variables are the same, except did I go an extra half a mile or an extra 1/10 of a mile, or did I, do this? And man, I'm telling you again, like the more carbohydrate you have within reason, obviously, if your goal is body fat loss, you're not going to be eating a Big Mac before you do cardio. But you really do stimulate greater work output. Obviously carbohydrates are ergogenic, and so they allow you to work harder. Your heart is beating harder. You're using more muscle tissue. You're burning more calories. So having enough food pre-workout is important. And then just dependent on your goals, Dan, is what you'd want to have post-workout. So then you're thinking, okay, now this is a time. I certainly have, now that I'm having 75 grams of carbs pre-workout, I don't need a ton post-workout, but that's obviously where I'm going to have a pretty good protein source and a little bit of carbohydrate to replenish.
Yeah, I just came across the study that Lane Norton referred to, and he showed that that study that he looked at said that people who worked out in the AM got stronger faster than people who worked out in the PM. So I'm wondering if there's a correlation here, or it's just, happenstance that would be the case. Because if you're using your nutrients better in the AM, you'd get a better workout, you would get stronger faster. I mean, it seems to make sense.
And testosterone is naturally higher in the morning. So that's a big variable that people have looked at for those same reasons. So I think it's both probably, Dan, for real.
Yeah, it could be the perfect storm then.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that's good. All right,
Okay, so I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Because these people, because you said this was in the Journal of Obesity, but these people in this study I think they had really good BMIs, didn't they?
26 to 20, 19 to 26, somewhere in there.
So do you think that this would be much different for obese people?
You
Do
know,
you think there'd be a greater difference?
I will say that I'm trying to get to the people here. I want to make sure I gave you that right information here. Yeah, 19 to 26 on the BMI. So, you know, that's even a pretty good range, 19 to 26. You could be 30 or, so pounds overweight and be at that 6 level. But just because this was published in the Journal of Obesity doesn't mean that every study in that journal is with obese people. And so one of the things they're looking at is just biochemically, they just wanted, I think, kind of an average Homo sapien. I'm guessing, because obviously for their study, they could have picked anybody. So they wanted them to at least be somewhat standardized. And since they picked a young-ish population and a healthy-ish population, I think they just wanted to eliminate comorbidities. It's one of the things. Matter of fact, I just answered my own question. They specifically said they wanted to eliminate health compromise and comorbidities because they didn't want any of that data to be skewed. So they just wanted to look at physiologically what's the best way to do this. Yep. Tiffany, can you
were these people, I'm not sure if I missed it in the study parameters, but were these people eating at maintenance or were they in a deficit?
For the study, they put them at maintenance. So they had kind of I think it was a 14-day washout period. And then they did the initial test and then 7-day washout. And then they redid it, flipping groups. So definitely at maintenance, at least for that period of time during the study. Tiffany, jump in there quick.
Real quick, you get the standard email that says, "Hey, I'm stuck," and it hasn't even been a week yet, and you're like looking, and it's down a pound, you're fine. You're like, okay. So I take a look at your food logs, and I see that your dinner was 80 grams of carbs and Kellogg's Frosted Flakes at midnight, and you wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning for work. And those are like my favorites. Those are my favorite fixes. I just did this like 3 days ago. I had a girl that did this exact scenario, and I was like, hey, flip your breakfast and your dinner. And she was like, really? It was like, yeah, I think you can eat Frosted Flakes for dinner if you wanted to. Like, I think you can do that. She was like, okay, I'm going to try it. She flipped her breakfast and her dinner exactly. Boom, she texted me today. She goes, 2 pounds. I was like, cool. But that's like one of my favorite fixes right now.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the biggest takeaways with that, Tiffany, if I could just back up a couple steps, is whenever I am helping a student prepare in the National Academy of Metabolic Science for their exam, or they're sending in practice case studies and we're going over it, I have a lot of kind of if-then scenarios, because I want to know how a coach is thinking, before I will put my certification stamp on them. And so, you've been through the certification, that I'll say, okay, if a client stops losing weight for 1 week, what do you do? If they're just getting started and they feel like they're stalling, what do you do? If they, I have all of these different scenarios I go through, and it's disheartening sometimes when coaches or, up and coming coaches will say, oh, well, I'll cut calories by 100, or I'll do this, I'll do that. They're very astute, proper things. But hardly anybody starts out by saying, well, I would want to look at their food logs. I want to see what kind of food sources there are. I want to look at their meal timing. I want to see if there are any things that may lead to inaccuracy or less predictability. And so, yeah, before you ever just start slashing food out of the energy balance, look at some of those qualitative things. That's a hugely important thing. So, yeah, well done just to dig into some of that stuff. And obviously Frosted Flakes, you gotta have them. It works. Kevin is nodding. He's like, and Reese's cereal.
Burgers, pizza, Jimmy John's with you.
My wife's out of town, and one of the first things I wanted to do is like go pick up a sandwich at a drive-through. And I'm like, really? Are you gonna be that freaking lazy? Like, she's not even gone for 12 hours, and you're already just like, can't even make yourself some egg whites.
I'll drive over and pick you up. Just take you through the drive-thru and I'll drive back.
So now I have that opposite goal. Now I'm like, okay, you know, I'll just, since she's not here, I just won't eat, and I'll lose an extra pound, and that'll be good. Any other thoughts or questions on this one, guys? It was, like I said, one of the things I'm trying to do sometimes with these, I get a little too meta, and I want to show every single nuance and every reason why this may be and this might not. But I think just sticking to one study like this allows us to go a little bit deeper.